In the absence of everything, there was the void. But the void itself was something, even if it was the absence of everything. From this paradox, something came to exist where previously nothing did, and thus was creation born, the primordial force that creates something out of nothing. Yet the void's essence was absence itself. Creation may have come into being first, but destruction was the older sibling of the two, the void's soul and will to be naught. This is the dawn of existence, and the two primordial powers, creation and destruction, have struggled for dominance since. Fragile as the paradox that birthed it, creation struggled to endure against destruction and the will of the void. This uneven contest between the two siblings unfolded countless times across countless eons, following the same pattern. Creation escapes the clutches of the void, running rampant and forging a cosmos from nothing, until it is invariably recaptured and destroyed, only to be reborn and escape once more, perpetuating this cycle for all eternity. It is impossible for a mortal mind to grasp how many universes were spawned by creation only to be consumed by destruction. How many eons passed as both siblings struggled against each other, or for how many more they would have kept struggling had things not suddenly changed. In the midst of a particularly savage bout between the two primordial beings, as destruction had once more been on the very edge of subsuming its sibling, something new happened. Reaching into its sibling, creation sparked forth a small cosmos within destruction itself, landing a telling blow against its elder. For the first time in its unimaginably long experience, destruction felt pain. Maddened and humiliated, it unleashed its counter-blow with tremendous power, but no thought or plan, shattering creation into untold pieces and scattering its glowing essence across existence. Confounded by the consequences of its ill-considered blow, destruction realized it had to regather creation's essence from the far reaches of existence to once more subsume him. Wounded, bewildered, and weary, the elder primordial chose instead to rest and heal before this monumental task. And so destruction curled upon its wound and slept, its essence slowly trickling from its gash and into existence. So it came to be that for the first time ever since the dawn of existence itself, creation and destruction were silent. In the absence of their presence and power, a new primordial was born. Balance. Weaker by far than its two mighty siblings, Balance knew, from the very first moment of its awareness, that should either creation or destruction awake, its own existence would come to an end. Thus, Balance set the stars spinning in the night sky, ensuring that they, the mightiest shards of creation, would remain in constant movement, never to meet and coalesce once more. The fledgling primordial then turned to destruction, which lay in fitful slumber still, curled around its wound as it slowly spun in space. Gently and quietly, so as not to wake it, Balance started enveloping its sibling, insulating it from existence so that nothing might disturb its slumber. Cocooning destruction in its own essence, Balance wove the dust that hung in the void following the primordial conflict of its siblings, slowly but surely binding destruction within a prison forged of stone, dust, and the very essence of Balance. Soon it had enveloped destruction in a gigantic sphere of stone and dust, inside which the eldest of the primordials raged. And thus the world was born. Destruction remained the mightiest primordial, and its essence could not be contained. It would still seek to break from its prison, for even though exhausted, wounded, and asleep, its power was more than a match for fledgling balance. From this, destruction's most primordial impulse to consume creation and return to the absence of the void, arose famine, first incarnate soul of destruction. The first of the horsemen of the apocalypse had arrived, and with it, the rekindling of the primordial war. Famine's blind hunger drove it to consume all it could encounter, its bottomless appetite craving for everything around it. Even destruction itself was no more proof against famine's predations than its hapless siblings. Asleep though it was, destruction raged and roiled at this betrayal, coiling around itself, collapsing and crushing the wound from which famine feasted, making temperatures rise to fight this parasite it had spawned. Faced with this unrelenting heat and pressure, famine was forced to flee, turning its blind hunger on balance, whose body formed the prison bounding destruction. Balance struggled mightily, weaving denser and denser matter about itself, compacting its essence into it so tightly that the stone itself changed, creating the metals that veined its body around the raging core of destruction. Over the course of the struggle, adamantine was created, a metal so strong not even the primordial forces could breach. Unfortunately, this miraculous material was too little, its creation too late. Grown mighty on the essence, its forebear, famine was formless, relentless, and could not be contained. Powerful mawed tendrils wound through the net balance desperately wove for it and broke loose. Famine's tendrils churned through the surface of balance and reached even further. Stars dimmed and died as tendrils found them, and holes were carved into the fabric of reality itself. Balance churned beneath the assault of famine, its surface cracking and breaking as rents and wounds welled with the blood of destruction. As famine's tendrils devoured stars and tore rents into the heavens, the shards of creation, the very stars themselves, cried out in pain and suffering. Among them, one, the greatest of their number, had retained enough power and cohesion to maintain true sentience. Aware that shattered and weak though they were individually, together they could effectively challenge famine. This shard forsook its place in the heavens to awaken and guide its vulnerable brethren and reclaim by force their place in existence. Conquest, incarnate soul of creation, second of the horsemen, took to the field against famine and its endless predation. Sweeping through the heavens, Conquest rallied its brethren, waking those which slumbered still and binding to its side those too weak to take form without aid. Its clarion call mustered those pieces of creation that would answer, and under Conquest's banner, the celestial host, the greatest fighting force the universe had ever seen, was marshalled. Unlike balance, this force was not bound to a single physical body, and while individually weaker than the mighty famine, Conquest was fully sentient, driven by purpose and design rather than pure instinct. Leading the newly forged celestial host, Conquest took to fight the famine, refusing to fight it head-on, but rather focusing on severing famine's tendrils one by one, starving it of resources while grounding its power at an ever-increasing rate. Little by little, gaping maw by gaping maw, famine was bloodily contained, if not defeated, and in the arrival of creation's horsemen was balance established and the cosmos saved. But the clamor of that raging effort to contain famine had created something new. This was no longer a conflict between siblings. This was something greater, something that echoed and harmonized with destruction as much as it did with creation, if not more. And as the clamor of this conflict reached destruction in its uneasy slumber, it tossed and turned, as dreams of endless conflict raging through the cosmos quickened mind and body, bringing forth bloody-handed war, incarnate soul of destruction, and a third of the horsemen. War immediately took the fight to conquest, drawing on the blood of destruction that had been spilt in the primordial conflict, and that now coursed over the surface of balance. It forged a host in answer to the celestial one. Instantly the two hosts, the abyssal and the celestial, were locked in mortal combat, no quarter asked or given, with war's untrammeled ferocity and endless supply of forces perfectly countered by the visionary genius of conquest. The conflict quickly burgeoned and raged across all of existence. Both forces so evenly matched, one could not gain the advantage over the other. With conquest and the celestial host occupied on all fronts, famine once more burgeoned and grew. Balance struggled mightily against this onslaught, but with its allies otherwise engaged, it could not see a way out. And as famine once more gnawed at its flesh, balance gave in to despair and wept. Tears tracked their way through the scars that now covered the world that was balance. They cooled the savage blood of destruction and mingled with the spilt essence of creation, bringing forth perhaps the greatest miracle in all of existence: life. Smitten by the beauty, potential, and innocence of this unexpected wonder, Balance threw caution and self-preservation to the winds. Seeking to shelter and protect this precious gift despite the conflict that raged across its surface and all of existence, Balance brought life to its bosom and fed it of its essence. Hidden away in the shallow depressions where water met the tortured surface of Balance itself, life bloomed under the gentle care of the dying primordial. Too small and insignificant to attract the notice of famine, whose hunger aimed for stars and primordial hosts, it grew exponentially. Mindless, and thus heedless of this growing threat, famine continued with its ceaseless rampage across the cosmos, giving life the time it needed to establish itself on the surface of Balance. As it spread at an exponential rate, it quickly outpaced the devouring maws of famine. Soon roots were questing down into the earth, healing the wounds of Balance and binding famine with 1,000 fibrous fingers. Contained by a force as relentless as its hunger, famine found itself assailed on 1,000,000 fronts, its essence matched and contained by the miraculous powers of life. Life thrived in Balance as much as Balance thrived on life, and for the first time since the onset of the primordial war, Balance found itself on the offensive. Destruction was slowly being smothered by the growing power and cohesion of Balance's body, life filling every nook and cranny the imprisoned primordial sought to escape from. Under this creeping onslaught, destruction receded further into slumber as its hopes for escape were slowly withering. Its dreams turned to nightmares, haunted by the echoes above, life's noise and movement crawling erratically against its wish and longing for the silence and stillness of the void. Fused with the fear and despair of its nightmares, destruction's will was cast forth, a quiet doom to the creeping power of life. Thus did death, the fourth horseman, last incarnate soul of destruction, come to roam the stars. It is said that, as the first living creature died, Balance, which had borne the incessant gnawing of famine at its very core with no more than silent tears, let out a wail of sorrow and despair that pierced the heavens. Death stifled life relentlessly. A single touch enough for bright, vibrant continents to turn dim and silent across the surface of balance. Only the hardiest of beings survived the reign of death, while, freed from the constraints of life, mindless famine renewed its assault. Soon, the tide had turned once more, but from across the void, Balance's desperate cry was heard. The violence of the primordial struggle that spawned Balance was such that destruction itself had bled, and creation had been torn asunder. The very essence of the primordials thus came to rest in existence in varying strengths and concentrations. Some were great, like the stars or the lightless holes that swallow them. Others were large enough to retain some will and focus, but no identity. These would quickly get subsumed into the primordial hosts of war and conquest, either as weapons, tools, or pets. Those that had retained enough identity to defend themselves would be recruited as warriors. Most others were too small to be employed by the hosts. These smaller motes settled in obdurate stone and ore, creating most of the fantastic minerals and alloys that would be employed in later days. Primordial motes smaller than even those trapped in stone and mineral were trapped in the web of life itself, warping the creatures of Balance to new and strange and sometimes dangerous forms, imbuing their bodies with incredible but unbalanced gifts and mutations. But there were some fragments which had come to none of these ends. There were some fragments that had found their opposites. Forged from the fusion of the blood of creation and the blood of destruction, these unions were vastly more powerful than the sum of their parts, and invariably self-aware. These entities swam the cold void where, dominated by an intense curiosity, they gazed upon countless wonders from the very dawn of this cosmos. Whether they heard the distress of Balance or were simply drawn by their curious nature to the clamour of battle, the fate of the cosmos turned on their arrival. Lured into the side of the primordial war, these creatures instinctively understood the conflict raging before them. From the fusion of intrinsically opposite forces, these were creations of Balance, but not born of it. While they intuitively knew that they would not survive in a cosmos bereft of balance, it was not this cold pragmatism that made them join the primordial war. To creatures whose main impulse remained curiosity, the sheer variety and explosion of possibilities that life presented was a much greater promise. Mighty enough to challenge their primordial parents, their power far outshone the sum of the forces that had created them, and, loath to see the wonder of life pass from existence, joined the fray on the side of Balance. This mere arrival heralded the end of the primordial war. These beings, whose diminished descendants would ultimately come to be known as dragons, turned the tide of battle. With the aid of conquest, they vanquished death, famine, and war, sealing them away for eons beyond counting. With the horsemen of destruction defeated and bound, these primordial dragons were forced to turn on Conquest, lest its unchallenged presence shatter Balance and once more release destruction. Loath to attack their erstwhile ally with their full might, they were able to negotiate an agreement with Conquest. It would not be beaten and bound, rather its essence would be shattered and scattered throughout Balance, so that it might behold the wonders it had helped protect, and continue its eternal war against the leaderless abyssal host.